Hello, good afternoon and welcome to The Big Picture live on University Radio Nottingham with Felix Hawes
and Thomas Gregory.
Joining us today we have Daniel.
Good afternoon, guys.
And Rebecca.
Hi.
Hello. Well, our three topics today we are again unfortunately talking about Russia-Ukraine. We are also going to be talking about developments in the Middle East. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been released from Iran, and Boris Johnson's been to Saudi Arabia looking for a new partner for more oil due to the country no longer wanting to rely on Russian resources. And our third topic will be the French presidential election, as the 12 candidates have been finalised for the election that is occurring in early April. It's a 2-round process. That's will be the first round. But first of all then, Russia-Ukraine. Well, Russia is still in Ukraine, although it hasn't made a lot of progress recently, but continues to shell lots of cities. And President Zelensky's been addressing multiple parliaments across the world. He's addressed the House of Commons, where he said, paraphrased Churchill's comments, famous "we will fight them on the beaches" comments, and mentioned Shakespeare. To the US, he mentioned about 9/11, and to Germany he referenced the Berlin Wall. So very targeted adverts. But he's also said this week that it's unlikely that Ukraine will ever be able to join NATO, conceding one of the many proposals Putin wants Ukraine to follow. What do we make of this? Is this President Zelensky making a right decision here to try and tone down the tensions in the region, or is this, and this is no blame to him, but is this showing that Russia can get what it wants eventually by using force?
I mean, I think unfortunately Zelensky here is right. Ukraine, it can't join NATO. It would be too preposterous. Russia would never agree to it. I think what you've got to understand with this Ukraine war is there are essentially three wars that are going to be fought. You've got an information war that's going on at the minute, of which we are all partakers in. You've got a military war, and finally you've got a war that hasn't even started yet, which will be the peace deal war. And if Ukraine goes into that saying we're going to join NATO, it's just going to prolong this conflict anyway. So it's not actually in NATO's interest, I don't think, to accept Ukraine. They might want to, and it's not in Ukraine's interest either. So he's unfortunately right.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be really hard for NATO to accept Ukraine, and I think that in reality, yes, obviously this is some kind of concession towards Russia, but at the same time, Ukraine hasn't got many options, and so far Russia has proved, a very strong adversary. I think this is, President Zelensky has talked about the fact that he just wants to effectively work out some kind of solution with Russia, so I think this makes the most sense.
So do you think that we might see President Zelensky agreeing to other terms that Putin's put forward? I mean, some of them are more difficult than others, including the denazification of Ukraine. President Zelensky, I imagine that will hit him quite hard.
That's just propaganda. That is just propaganda. The idea that that Ukraine is this Nazi country, there are more neo-Nazis there than there are in say, Western Europe, but that is something that, say, Russian TV constantly paints out, is that Ukraine is this new Germany, as Germany was in the 1940s. But go on, finish your point, Felix.
No, I was going to say,
even though they're run by an authoritarian,
is President Zelensky going to be able to denazify a country that doesn't have Nazis in government? But also, is Putin also demands that there will be no military presence in Ukraine, that Crimea should be Russia, and the independence of the two eastern Ukrainian republics as independent countries. Do you think we're going to see a situation where President Zelensky is going to agree to these as well? Or do you think he's going to hold firm and fight off, and Russia will eventually, give up their invasion? They've not made sort of any progress since we last spoke about this a week ago.
I think you've got to look at them one at a time, starting with Crimea. I know Russia currently controls Crimea. If they kind of solidify that in the peace talks to come, that wouldn't be particularly surprising, and it wouldn't be too detrimental to the West, I don't think, because Russia does have a lot of ties there. I think Ukraine's going to have to give away a lot of the eastern regions that are nationalist to the Russians. It's kind of unavoidable that gets given away to Russia as well. but then for Ukraine itself properly, we don't know. I don't even think, by the way, that Russia would be able to particularly run Ukraine if they took their army away. The puppet government that they'd have installed would be destroyed within days. It's probably their leader would be assassinated or something like that. If they keep their army there, well, the Russian army isn't as big as it used to be. That means the Russian army can't be in all the other places that they'd like to be across the globe. So it's not a particularly good situation for Russia. But yeah, Ukraine is going to have to give away its lands. Like that's the only available situation I can see for it.
I mean, on the idea of peace, surely it's the case, or the best case for Russia, if you want a Ukraine that's not well defended, you organise a peace talk so that they have no military in Ukraine, and then you come back and take them while they're weak again. Surely that is something that they must be looking out for.
What do you think, Rebecca?
I don't know. I think Russia's kind of so far made its statement. I agree that the whole fascism thing's just like a cover story for their own citizens. But as far as for the future of Ukraine, I think they'll have to concede some areas, and particularly when we talk about like Crimea, I think we can basically accept that Crimea is going to be gone, and that's going to be completely. I mean, it's effectively under Russian control now, but I don't think there's. I think there are going to need to be concessions by Ukraine, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to change anytime soon.
Do you think then that if this does happen, that we could see a situation where Russia invades Georgia and says, well, look, we're going to invade Georgia, and now we want the Russian-speaking areas of Georgia to be under our control too? And then maybe they could move into Moldova, because there's Russian minorities there as well, and just play the same cards again, invade until the government eventually concedes these Russian minority areas should join.
They're very
Russia.
careful about setting a precedent, aren't they?
I mean, if I could answer it, I think it's too early to tell in some ways. Because you've again in the information war, Russia is to an extent winning it. I think it's got an incredibly successful propaganda pumping TV stations that I know people that believe Putin that this Ukraine invasion is justified. I mean, that's extraordinary in my view, that he's actually won people that I know. But then secondarily,
Really?
yeah, I know people.
Russians or non-Russians?
Russian, yes. And Ukrainian apparently. Anyway, but then on the military side of things, again, I'm not sure they'll be able to take Georgia. But on the other hand, we are 22 days into this war, and the expectation that we've seen the Russian army fail. I mean, what were you expecting? Blitzkrieg or something in this military campaign? It's too early to tell. But that might be a long-term vision of Putin to take Georgia.
How they expect Ukrainian citizens to accept a leadership that's just bombed where they live, which is a war crime, is beyond me. How there's any long-term planning in this bombardment of people's homes? How is that even possible?
Well, there is an issue that many of Putin's inner circle, in a way for him to be able to personalise the dictatorship, are his old friends from the KGB with not military experience. I believe it is the case that the defence secretary and the chief of the armed forces are both not military people. They're just Putin's friends.
Well, they keep targeting the military leaders, don't they? Because it keeps popping up that like the
another
6th or 7th commander.
Yeah. But I suppose this would explain why Russia's campaign hasn't gone as successful as perhaps they thought. But with Daniel's point in this being early days, I suppose in our heads we think that things are going to happen very quickly. But Nazi Germany took France in 6 weeks. So that they wouldn't have met, if this was parallel to then, they wouldn't have done it yet. Even Poland, 35 days it took Nazi Germany to conquer Poland.
But everything's much quicker these days.
The invasion with France, they didn't even get to Paris, and then France surrendered. So it's not like they got all the way to Brest or something like that. But sure, I get you.
My question to you, maybe Felix, you might know more than me on this, is it's clearly off the cards for Ukraine to join NATO. I mean, that's the whole point. But what about Zelensky asking for Ukraine to become a part of the EU? Because how can they accept Ukraine as an EU member, which would annoy Putin, but also it would have security implications because it would be an EU country too. So surely that's just totally unfeasible. Equally unfeasible as joining NATO, surely.
Russia certainly does not want Zelensky and Ukraine to join the EU either. The EU obviously doesn't have the same defence policies as NATO, but they do have a sort of loose agreement that if one of them is attacked, then they will help each other, but it's not set in stone like NATO. And of course, the EU is an enemy to Russian influence because the EU, at least, is meant to subscribe to liberal democratic values. Of course, not all of its members do follow that. Hungary, Poland, for example. But
they've still fallen on our side.
They have indeed, and that of course is an issue that Russia will have. That the EU is another sort of super bloc that is with the different cultures, different ways of running, and of course most crucially for Putin, it means that he won't have control over his neighbouring states, and that for him is a problem either because of the security concerns that he espouses or because of his sort of pan-Slavic dreams of a united Eastern Europe under a Russian ruler.
Or even more likely, according to interview with the ex-wife of one of the elites, is probably more to do with the fact that he doesn't want to hurt his ego.
Well, it could well be that too. Looking at home, there's been some controversy regarding a peer that was appointed by Boris Johnson called Libredev, yes. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I imagine Daniel you're correct. Libredev. Now, so he was apparently the case that Boris Johnson was warned about him. He is the son of a KGB officer, and he's now in the House of Lords. He was warned about him, but he was appointed anyway, and there are now concerns from the opposition being raised that how far does Russian influence go in the Conservative Party? Money for peerages as well. On a wider scale, beyond this issue with Russia. What do you reckon to this? Do you think the Conservative Party has had too many dealings with Putin allies? And what do you think about this particular individual?
I mean, it feels kind of... It's hard to know exactly, but it does feel kind of accidental rather than necessarily something really nefarious is going on. At the same time, I think Boris Johnson's general handling of the Ukraine crisis at the moment hasn't been fantastic. So in that sense, obviously this is just another concerning element. I don't know.
I mean, there was an interesting sketch in the Private Eye about this guy where Boris Johnson asked him, Libredev, do you have the right papers? And he said, yes, I own the Evening Standard and the Independent. So he becomes a peer. Look, it's a tough one because you've expelled Russian oligarchs. But what about if they're Russian-British?
And what about taking their properties away from them if their wives live there, or if their family lives there?
Yeah, that's another tough one. So it's kind of difficult to comment. I mean, looking at the Evening Standard, they've been one of the most hostile papers to Putin during this Ukraine war. Whether that he's done that to save his job, I don't know. But he's been personally appealing to Putin to stop invading Ukraine.
Was that even before his sanctions? Because maybe that was.
I think so.
Maybe that policy's working.
I'm not sure he has been sanctioned, this particular peer.
No, he hasn't. But he has had big hit pieces on him.
Yeah.
Like, massive hit pieces. What was the original question? Sorry.
Well, what do you make of it? Is there a problem with the Conservative Party with Russian influence?
I think there is, but I'm not sure it's this particular guy. Because they have got a lot of donations from Russian people. But what you got to remember is some of these Russians are the best commentators on this invasion. I mean, in my opinion, during this invasion, Christian Constantin from Trigonometry, I think he's been absolutely world class commentator on this. But he's Russian, become a British citizen since 1995, I believe.
Well known for his anti-woke kind of discussion.
Yes, anti-woke, yes, but he's been, which was always good, but his Russian commentary, since he is Russian, and kind of seeing it from the Russian perspective has been particularly eye-opening, I think. So yeah, you got to be careful on this.
Do you think that? I think maybe is our last point on this topic.
One more after this.
There's
one more point.
Okay, so there's Graham Stringer is an MP for Labour who is going to be. I think we mentioned him recently. He's going to be joining Nigel Farage at a net zero campaign for a referendum on net zero. That is in itself bothering some people in Labour, but the crucial thing that is in the circles being speculated on by newspapers and political pundits is that Graham Stringer sharing a platform with Nigel Farage, who has been accused of being a Putin apologist.
Well, he's a realist and is very opposed to us provoking Russia, and has been since even before the referendum.
I mean, I think Nigel Farage has been more nuanced on this. I mean, I think in 2015 he said something like, "I admire Putin for the way he's played the game," and he got a lot of slack for that, when really he was just praising. He wasn't praising any of his policies. But Farage and I think Peter Hitchens, the only two people I've recognised who said, the West could have made better friends with Russia once the Soviet Union fell, and we missed an opportunity, and expanding NATO into some of the Eastern European countries has poked a bear. I praise the fact that he's one of the very few people who've said that. He hasn't, said this Ukrainian invasion is justified at all. He's nothing. But
do you
like
think that saying that I mean, this is also things that have been accused of Jeremy Corbyn as well, is that by putting it by saying that NATO aggression was poking the Russian bear, that somehow it justifies the invasion. Even we're not people. I don't think are saying that Nigel Farage or Jeremy Corbyn are pro-Putin, but just Putin apologists, giving him an excuse, a reason to why his invasion is justified.
That's taking what he said too far. And anyway, I think all he's been campaigning on is what's it called? Vote power, not poverty.
Yes, which Graham Stringer supports.
Should be, a classically socialist campaign. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Helps a lot of poor people, a lot of working class
Last week
people.
we spoke about the referendum, Daniel. Indeed,
I do apologise. I was not listening, but
we know.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, of course.
Wait, what was the question originally?
So is there, first of all, about the concern with the Conservative Party, but you addressed that, and I suppose I was bringing up Graham Stringer to bring up there was also concern from the left as well, that there are certain people on the left that are pro-Putin, not pro-Putin, sorry, Putin apologist. I apologise for that. Putin apologist.
Felix is an apologist for Putin apologist.
I think the thing is like, when we talk about Farage, for one thing, I don't think he's exactly a voice of reason, and I certainly don't think that he's got like nuance in what he's saying. As far as saying that like NATO has, there's an element of responsibility that the West needs to be honest about, and the fact that NATO has in some level been antagonising Russia for a long time, and that yes, there were previous opportunities to have negotiations following like the 1990s, like better, more diplomatic negotiations with Russia. I think that's fair to say. I don't think Farage is a particularly trustworthy voice on this. And as far as like the left goes, I think some people have been honest about the fact that NATO we have to be honest about like the West's role in this, and potentially, as international relations work, you have to be diplomatic. Perhaps we haven't been as diplomatic as we should have been, but at the same time, I don't think that necessarily makes you pro-Putin or necessarily even an apologist. I think there's like a nuance there. I just don't think Farage is in that.
Right. Well,
if I could rephrase what I said.
Go on then, Daniel.
I think what is worrying in the media at the minute is that Zelensky, yes, we all admire him, but he's kind of a cult's been made out of him, that he makes no mistakes. He's better than Churchill and all these kind of things. And Farage, to his credit, is one of the few people who says, well, let's just hold back on this a minute. He's certainly a good figure, but to make a cult out of him is worrying. There's basically no criticism of him whatsoever.
Isn't that what happens in war? Because Churchill himself, of course, had that sort of culture and cult behind him, and Churchill, of course, had some.
Churchill receives a lot of criticism.
Well, he does now,
even from people who like him. If you read Andrew Roberts on Churchill, he's like, Churchill had to learn from all his mistakes before World War II so that he could be such a good leader in World War II.
Right. Well, on the topic of On the topic of Putin apologists, that we also did have the news that he has been calling up Xi Jinping to see whether there's any help. We wonder whether Xi Jinping will be a Putin apologist or whether he will just keep his mouth shut. But either way, it's a bit of a call me maybe situation.
Hello and welcome back to the big picture, live on University Radio Nottingham. Our second topic today is we've had some good news. I mean, that is me breaking impartiality, but
news.
I do think there is some good news. Some British citizens have been released from Iran, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ajouri, although there is a third individual sadly still in Iran. They've been released. The British government has paid off some old debt from some, I believe, ships that were bought from
Challenger tanks.
Challenger tanks. Oh, thank you, Daniel.
1979.
1979, which was before the revolution in Iran. This was a legitimate payment. It
wasn't though up until very recently, because they've denied for 42 years.
42 years, but now it has been paid. They've said, this isn't us just giving money for ransoms, which the British government opposes in principle, because that means in the future anyone could be taken by any state or group, even pirates in Somalia, and the British government pays ransoms. That's not what they generally do. But they've been released. And elsewhere in the Middle East, Boris Johnson has been paying a visit to Saudi Arabia, wanting some oil from them. Saudi Arabia is
some green oil, some eco-friendly oil.
I don't think so.
Whoopsie daisy, there goes COP26.
Get some oil from Saudi Arabia, and some people have said, well, is this just going from one dictator to the other? Because Saudi Arabia, of course, is not known for its liberal values, and executed 81 people at the weekend by beheading, I believe.
Really?
So is it right to go from one dictator to the other? But of course, if we do not befriend Saudi Arabia, that will leave a difficult geopolitical situation in the Middle East with counterbalancing Iran, and of course that might be another country that is threatening to our ally Israel if we don't befriend Saudi Arabia. So what do we make of these two stories? Who wants to go first?
Do you want to go first?
I don't mind either.
Anything on the Middle East.
Okay. I'd say that, like, obviously the whole beheadings thing, and then us, like, yeah, it's not great timing. I would say that, like, obviously Saudi Arabia's never really been known for it's not been known for its human rights record. And as far as, like, the Iran situation, I think given the fact that Russian oil is something that's is obviously like an issue now, I don't think it's particularly surprising that we're still continuing to try to have a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, regardless of the fact that it's, like, morally questionable, and yeah, a bit of an issue really.
Well, no, you say good news, Felix. Is it good news? I mean, it's obviously good news for the Zaghari-Ratcliffe family. No one denies that. But you've given £400 million to what is an authoritarian regime. For what in return? I'm not sure we've received anything in return. We might get nuclear talks. Was it a good idea to give nuclear power anyway to Iran? I mean, the interesting thing about Iran is that it was, one of the most liberal countries in the Middle East prior to the Ayatollah takeover in 1979, and here's Britain kind of legitimizing the country, and all everyone cares about is a family of four that's reunited. We want a fantastic story, but is it actually good geopolitically for Britain to aid Iran? I'm not sure it is, because they spend a lot of money in dodgy places.
Well, it has been stated that the money is going to go towards humanitarian aid. Of course, that does not necessarily mean it will, but that's how the British government have got around it, because of course sanctions have prevented Britain from being able to pay Iran anyway, but it has been said it will be going towards humanitarian aid, and the British government is saying this is a legitimate debt. Do you think it is illegitimate, Daniel, and they've just found a way to be able to get...
What do you know about the history, boy?
Well, what I do know is that Foreign Secretary after Foreign Secretary could have done this. I'm not really sure what's changed. All that appears to have changed, we've got Liz Truss in charge, and she's done it and got really good positive media image from, saving as a Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
It's interesting how Dominic Raab didn't.
Well, apparently,
why didn't anyone else do it?
Apparently, the problem was getting around the sanctions on Iran, and the idea of paying off this debt from the 1970s has been around for, I believe, I might be wrong on this, but I believe since when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary, but there were just issues regarding how exactly they're going to make that payment due to the sanctions, and they've found the way to do it now under Liz Truss for humanitarian reasons. Liz Truss has been was called out in a positive way by Nazim's MP, who is a Labour MP, for saying that Liz Truss is the first Foreign Secretary since this all began to actually do something about it.
However, Boris Johnson, after being in trouble for his comments on Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, has kind of made it right again after his little stumble.
Yes, by the reference to this that Thomas is bringing up here is Boris Johnson saying that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was in Iran for journalistic purposes when that wasn't the case, and in fact I believe
the thing that they didn't want her to be.
Yes,
and
and Iran
that
used that
she
in their
was
trials.
training journalists in Iran. Yeah,
which I
mean, shock horror,
was
free
not the
press,
case.
but
What do you think, Daniel, about Saudi Arabia? Is it right that we're getting oil from Saudi Arabia? Now, I know from your previous appearances on this show that you're not so concerned about the green net zero program by this government, but do you think it is right that we are propping up a regime that is a dictatorship and does also abuse citizens in bombings in Yemen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what I meant to say here. That, of course, it's terrible, and in fact, prior to Russia invading Ukraine, I'm actually interested. I probably would have preferred Britain to be buying oil from Russia over Saudi Arabia. Obviously, that situation's changed, so we have to go to Saudi Arabia. The obvious solution to this is fracking the UK. I support that. I think that's the obvious solution to this. What would you prefer? Very minor environmental damage and lots of jobs in Lancashire, or buying lots of oils from Saudi Arabia? To me, it's an obvious decision.
Lots
really.
of potential in Scotland too.
I also believe they've found a new oil field off the coast of East Anglia as well. I've read that on Twitter, so I don't know if that's true, but I have seen that.
The Lancashire's the big one, because I believe it's later this month that they'd finally be ordered to close them up, seemingly forever. And they've just delayed it and said, well, maybe we'll use it for researching purposes. But since they haven't closed it, they could still use it for drilling, and I really think that they're missing out by not using it, to be honest.
Rebecca, I'm gonna guess you're not a fan of fracking. Am I right?
Yeah, you are. I'm not a fan.
Are you a fan of the environment?
Generally in favour of living in a hospitable Earth.
Also, you're a fan of high prices if we have to rely on renewables instead of.
Obviously not. I don't think people who are pro. I mean, we've literally just seen the eco-friendly girls, so I don't know. But maybe we should ask them. But
yeah.
Obviously I'm not a fan of high prices, and I'm not happy about the fact that Saudi Arabia, the practicalities of needing to negotiate oil with them. I don't think anybody's particularly happy that there are continual concessions that you have to make. Either things have to be expensive, or you have to do the environmentally more conscious option. It's just you can't really win. But I'm not a particular fan of fracking, but I also don't particularly have many solutions. So
It is very difficult because it was the worst time really for Russia to invade and compromise oil transport, because we were already having a fuel and oil crisis at the time, so it's only compounded the problem. Nevertheless, the UK's oil and fuel prices are particularly high for Europe because we do tax them quite significantly, hence why Starmer has been calling, for example, for the fuel price cap freeze or whatever. So it's a bit of a sticky one.
What do we reckon to morality in politics? The realist argument in international relations is that you have to ignore morality for the world to work. What do you take to that? Do you think that, okay, yes, we agree that Saudi Arabia is not a great regime, but we still have to trade with it because we need oil, but also to counterbalance Iran? And if that is the view that you think that is wrong, what do you reckon to us continuing to trade with China that is committing genocide? And also, and how far do we go with morality? Because even the USA is, of course, guilty of human rights abuses as well,
and is actually is really poor for signing human rights.
I think it's the only country in the world that said that water wasn't a human right. I might be wrong in that, but I think it is the only country. I think that's the case. I don't want to telling porcupines on the radio, but I think that is the case. What do you reckon to that then? Morality in politics, is it important that we now, in the light of the invasion of Ukraine, that it's something maybe we should start bringing in?
I guess the question is, does the West, if we think we are the more morally upstanding of the communities of the world, is it best that we have to make sacrifices on our morality by buying oil in order to keep economic and political hegemony so that we can influence good in the world, or should we set the example and risk losing our hegemony over the cultural and social and economic aspects of the world?
It's become quite philosophical.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say that, we
like the big picture here.
Yeah, I'd say that, obviously, whenever you have any big countries with a lot of power, then generally speaking, there's usually a cost to that power. So yeah, China's, as you said, commits a lot of they're currently not great on the human rights record. I don't think there's an easy solution. The practicality is that you do, in order to function as a country, as far as gaining our own power, I don't think it's necessarily always about that. It's sometimes just about maintaining any kind of relevance on the world stage, and being able to function. So yeah, I think you do have to make a lot of concessions morally. It's not easy, but at the same time, the West does have a lot of power, NATO has quite a lot of power, and we are sometimes able to evoke some level of change, and sometimes that's what you have to try and do the best you can in that sense, rather than necessarily expect to fix every country.
Yeah, I think firstly on the small picture, you got to talk about what does Saudi Arabia.
That's not our radio show.
Yeah, it's philosophical now.
Well, I know, but it is answering the question before this one, which is that you can talk about the positives of Saudi Arabia. I remember Theresa May praising Saudi Arabia for saying that they helped foil terrorism plots in the United Kingdom, and so they do some good things. Unfortunately, because that makes life harder for us as people wishing to analyse the morality of Saudi Arabia. But on the bigger picture, foreign policy is always harder than domestic policy, because in domestic policy, you know it better. You usually know it better. And it's quite easy to say, well, I think this is the best solution. Whereas in foreign policy, because you're dealing with foreign governments that you might fundamentally disagree on, there sometimes is no good option. The event that really caused me to realise that was, I think, last summer, if you remember, there was a British ship in international waters, but Iran again, by the way, who thought it was Iranian waters. They took it. We're not allowed to float ships through this area anymore. And I was like, right, I tried to work out in my head, what is the best policy decision? Does it send in the military? There was no good decision. And I think that's probably the same for Ukraine. You just have to try and work out, and you're going to make more mistakes than domestic policies on average, what is the least worst option. So fitting immorality into that is very difficult, but it's commendable to try and stick to it as much as possible.
And what is the least worst option, of course, depends on what you regard as the kind of criteria for a least worst option.
That's also true.
Are we good on that? Should we move along? Well, we'll go to a little break, but it's a difficult topic. What's going on in the Middle East and our relationship with them, and as you were saying, that there isn't necessarily always a right answer, Daniel. It's as if, for example, the sky is the world of morality, and in it we are purely free falling.
Hello and welcome back to The Big Picture. Our third topic today is the French presidential election. 12 candidates have now been announced from the election that's happening in early April. That's the first round. So some context. The French election is a 2-round process, and of these 12 candidates, the two that get the highest amount of votes in the first round will go on to the second round.
Double ballot.
Macron is contesting, who is the current president. He can serve another 5-year term. It is normally the case in France that a president doesn't last more than one term. They get rid of them quite quickly. Francois Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy are the two most recent examples.
Can you go any more than two batches of 5?
Two is the maximum.
Like
America, but 5 rather than 4 years.
Unless you're Roosevelt and a war happens, and then you have to stay on.
Well, actually, at that point,
Great history,
the two-term rule hadn't been in place. That came afterwards.
Oh, really?
It did indeed.
That.
So the 12 candidates, well, there's some that are almost certainly not going to get the nomination because their polling is very low. But to put it into context again, last time it was Macron versus Le Pen. Le Pen was of what was then labelled as far-right party, the National Rally, I believe it translates to. Normally it is the case that the centre-left and the centre-right parties are through to the second round, but that doesn't seem to be the case last time. It doesn't seem to be the case this time. So our other candidates, we've got Macron, who is the sort of centrist to centre-right party, although I think
centre-right,
I think he would be probably more to the right if he was in this country, based on some of his views on immigration. Economically, I don't know quite so much. You've also got Le Pen, who's running again, but she's being challenged from even further on the right, Eric Zemmour. Eric Zemmour has been very critical of many different things. He advocates the Great Replacement theory, which is the idea that the French are being replaced by predominantly he seems to think Muslims, and that is a scheme being done by the elites. He's said that D-Day was a British colonial invasion, and I'm going to say something that might be quite upsetting for some of our listeners. He's also said that Muslim women should take off their burqas because he wants to see their beautiful faces.
However, that is different in a French context because, of course,
they have their secularization, but still, perhaps some would deem that a crass comment. And he is polling reasonably well, about 11%. Other top candidates, I won't name all 12.
That's really significant.
It is, isn't it? And Le Pen is on about 16-17% at the moment. The other top candidates at the moment are also Valérie Pécresse, if I've mispronounced her name, I apologise, of the Republican Party. That is the traditional centre-right party. And you've also got
small government kind of party.
Mélenchon, who is running from the far left. He's also had some controversial statements in the past where he said the victory, the winner of this election has already been decided. He seems to be part of that sort of conspiracy that it's all rigged. They're the top ones. I didn't even mention Hidalgo, who's the mayor of Paris, who's the centre-left candidate, because she's polling at about 3%, so wow. There's no chance of that. So they're the sort of top 5. They're the ones polling about 10%. Macron is almost certainly guaranteed to get through to the second round, and the second place candidate to get through is at the moment a sort of a toss-up between Le Pen, Zemmour, Pécresse and Mélenchon, although it does at the moment seem to be Le Pen, but all 4 of those potentials, they're all polling within 10% of each other.
And that's what we got time for.
That's been a very long introduction.
That was a nice lesson.
What do we reckon to the French presidential election? What are your thoughts? What do you think is going to happen, and what do you think of the candidates?
If you think anything's going to happen, if you've even thought about it at all.
Well, may I just say, firstly, what a splendid introduction to the topic.
I learned a lot.
Felix Hawes, he really is an exemplary host.
Thank you, Daniel.
What about me?
Well, you have good catch lines before the song. every single time it makes me laugh. Look, I think the basic prediction here is that it's going to be a repeat of last time, and that is Le Pen and Macron going into a final 2 head-to-head. And of course, last time, if you haven't forgotten, spoilt votes beat Le Pen.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she actually came third if you include spoilt ballots.
That's so strange, isn't it? Isn't that a strange system?
I didn't know that. That is interesting.
Yeah, if you count them up. So
because there's so many people that didn't like either of them.
Yeah. That is the extraordinary thing.
Do you think that's going to be even higher this time, as Macron is less popular than he was at the time?
Oh, I can't. I mean, no one polls how many spoilt ballots are going to be so it's a bit of a difficult one to predict. But no, it's interesting with this Zemmour thing. I wonder if that's going to help Le Pen, because you've kind of got on the right, you've got the far right, who really do tinker with racism, and that's kind of where Le Pen was portrayed last time. But with Zemmour, they're like, goodness, maybe she's in a different category of being hard right, which is kind of votable in the media's eyes. And if that's happened to her, that could benefit her. But again, the left is shattered in France, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think Macron's going to win. I don't know how easily he's going to win. I don't think he's got much of a competition against Le Pen, but at the same time, I just don't think that she's going to win. I don't think she has a chance. That would be interesting to see about the ballot thing, how many spoiled ballots come out of it. As I think it's quite surprising though, like you were saying actually in the introduction, the fact that the other two parties have kind of really fallen to the wayside, and Macron, because his party was newer, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was invented for him to get into office. He was a previous member of the Socialist Party, I believe.
Yeah, and the fact that also he's had issues during his presidency. He hasn't been the most popular at all times. We've seen that with the Jean Gilets. So I think it's interesting the fact that the other candidates and how they kind of weigh up to Macron. Obviously he has an advantage in that he's actually more well known and things like that, but I don't necessarily think it's that his policies are necessarily uniting loads of people. I think it's that the other candidates are also just really bad.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that you guys have decided to look up spoilt ballots in the French election, and do that. The other interesting thing is that it appears that Macron is bribing the French voters. He is subsidising fuel and I think energy. You'll have to look this up, Thomas Gregory, that'd be very kind. But yeah, he's apparently subsidising everything in April, just that 1 month when the election is taking place. I'm not a big Macron fan, a bit of a Europhile, so I hope he loses. But I'm not a fan of. Who would you
prefer?
The dreaded.
Because this is.
I'm a fan of spoiling the ballot. Nearly did it in the British general election. Maybe I'd do that if I was French. I don't know.
Rebecca, do you have a particular favourite candidate or
favourite French candidate?
I mean,
is that too tricky?
Not Zemmour, but
you don't say.
No, but I think probably. I mean. I don't think that to be fair, I'm not really an expert when it comes to French politics, but I would say Macron has done some good things on the international world stage. As far as the domestic policies goes, to be honest,
his meeting with Putin went incredibly well.
And he had a photo shoot of himself afterwards, which was interesting, with his head in his hands. But mentioning Putin, of course, Zemmour and Le Pen have both been sympathetic towards Putin. I think Zemmour said that he wanted to be France's Putin, and this is probably not going to go down too well with the French population, which I believe I saw an opinion poll, I think it was by Politico, I'm not sure exactly, that said that only about 3% of France are sympathetic towards Putin, despite the political establishment being slightly more inclined to his way of thinking. That was at least before the invasion, so that might actually damage Le Pen and Zemmour. But we don't have too much long left.
I'm just going to look at. I'm just going to tell you some stats from last time.
Let's go.
In the first round, Macron got 24% and Marine Le Pen 21%, followed quickly by the Republicans on 20%. So in the second round, where only Macron and Le Pen ended up, Macron got basically double what Marine Le Pen did. So it was quite a significant win for Macron. Looking at the predictions from the pollsters, they reckon Macron is on 30% and Le Pen 17% in the first round, bearing in mind it was 24% and 21%. So the Macron looks like he is significantly ahead when it comes to the predictions of the pollsters, but can you always trust the pollsters? They get it wrong most of the time.
I think part of this is, of course, that Le Pen's lost a lot of voters to Zemmour from her right, and I think the collapse of the Socialist Party has probably helped Macron getting more people from the left. But that was going to be my next question before we end today's show, is if you're a left-winger in France, but a sort of centre-left minded person, So he thinks that Mélenchon is too extreme on that side and Macron is too to the right. And obviously those further to the right than Macron are incredibly to the right of you. What do you do in this situation? What is the hope for the future of France's centre-left?
You cry at first. I think you have to vote for Macron in the second round. First round, you're probably quite happy to waste your vote because that appears to be what most French people do. But yeah, I know there isn't much hope. But then again, French politics works very differently. I mean, the traditional Conservative Party in France basically doesn't exist anymore. But that's never happened in Britain. It's continued to exist for 300 years or so. So it works differently. I don't think they should give up hope just yet.
Yeah, I'd say like Macron. I think also it depends a bit culturally. It's hard for us to say like left and right compared to our understandings of that in our own country.
A good point.
Like I think Macron would probably be considered more centre than he would like centre right in France, because I think French people are generally slightly more right wing. And that's kind of quite a generalisation to make, but
I think on average that probably is the case. Yeah.
So I think in that sense, so if we're looking at it from the French perspective, I'd say probably Macron's not too bad of an option, relatively anyway.
Oui. Well, on that note, it's time for us to end the big picture for today, but we've had some wonderful conversations. Thank you to Daniel and Rebecca, and Abikay's helping out in the studio, and of course I have been Thomas Gregory,
and I have been Felix Hawes,
and this has been the big picture live on University Radio Nottingham, and hopefully in the names of Tyler the Creator we will see you again